The notice of execution went up on the gate of Marbury Grange while she was still mending the hem. Juliana Danvers pulled the thread through the faded biscuit muslin, 3 patches deep, and did not look up. Berkshire, 1818. Her stepmother Lavinia emptied 4 boxes of London gowns across the drawing-room floor for Sybil, and left nothing on the table for supper. At her throat hung her mother's shell cameo, the last thing in that house that was hers. 5 miles away, Rochford Hall lit its windows for a betrothal. Duke Piers Onslow had a signet ring of gold, a contract waiting in a lawyer's red leather case, and no intention of signing it blind. The invitation came. Juliana was forbidden to go. She walked the 5 miles through the rain, entered by the servant's door, and sat down to tea with a new maid called Mrs. Prue. Neither woman said who she was, neither guessed what the other was worth, and what was already moving through the rooms of that house, in plain brown serge and a footman's powdered wig. Before the story begins, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of justice, dignity, and love that arrives against all odds move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. Berkshire in the autumn of 1818, and the light in the still room of Marbury Grange came from one candle, because Juliana Danvers had decided that morning that 2 candles were a luxury the house had not earned. She sat with the biscuit muslin across her knees and drove the needle through the hem for the 3rd time in as many seasons. The thread was brown, the gown was not. She had stopped pretending the colors would ever match. Outside, a hammer struck iron. Her hand did not stop. It slowed, the way a clock slows before it stops, and then it went on. 3 stitches, 4, and the hammer struck again at the gate. The maid Bess came in without knocking, which told Juliana everything before the girl opened her mouth. "Miss, there's a man at the gate with papers." "Then he will need the smaller nails," Juliana said. "The posts are rotten on the north side." Bess went out. Juliana bit the thread, laid the needle in her mother's sewing box, and closed the lid over the little brass hasp. Then she rose, put the shawl round her shoulders, and walked the length of the corridor, where 9 of the 12 portraits had been sold, and the paler squares of wall remained like windows onto nothing. The gravel was wet. The agent was a thin man in a wet hat, and he had already got 2 nails into the notice when she reached him. He looked up. He had expected a butler. "Miss Danvers?" "The elder." She read the paper over his shoulder while he held it. She read it twice. Notice of execution, the sum in a clerk's beautiful hand, the date left blank for the sheriff to fill. 940, she said. "And the interest, miss." "The interest is what makes it 940. She took the corner of the paper and straightened it against the post, so that the notice would hang level. "There, if it must be read by every carter on the Reading Road, it may as well be read straight." The agent looked at her hands. There were calluses on the first 2 fingers of the right one, the shine that needles leave. He had nailed 40 of these notices in Berkshire that year, and every house had met him with a slammed door or a whiskey-red squire shouting about his family's honor. None of them had straightened the paper. He touched his hat and went to his horse. Juliana stood a moment at the gate. Down the road, past the lime avenue that her father had planted and never seen grown, a rider had drawn up on the rise. He was too far off for a face. Black horse, dark greatcoat with a double collar, hatless in the drizzle. He was not moving on. He was reading the gate the way a man reads a ledger, and Juliana understood without being told that he had watched the whole of it, the nails, the paper, the woman straightening it. She lifted her chin and looked back at him. The rider inclined his head, not the nod a gentleman gives a lady, something slower. Then he turned the black horse and was gone behind the hedge. Piers Onslow, 7th Duke of Rochford for 7 months and a ship-owner out of Bristol for 20 years before that, rode 2 miles before he spoke to the man beside him. Marbury Grange. Sir Rowland Danvers deceased. Augustus Ferrers rode badly and knew it, and kept both hands on the reins. His red leather case was buckled across his back like a schoolboy's satchel. The widow is the second wife. The paper on the gate is a formality. The debt behind it is already yours, your grace. Purchased in March, through the Reading house, with 2 others. And the woman at the gate? The daughter of the first marriage. Ferrers pushed his spectacles up his nose with one knuckle. There is no note of her in the settlement. There is no note of her anywhere, which is itself a note. Piers said nothing. The scar on the back of his right hand had gone white in the cold, as it always did, and he flexed the fingers once inside the glove. He had spent 7 months learning that a title buys a great deal. Beaux, invitations, letters from mothers with daughters. It had bought him a county he had never lived in, and a house with scaffolding up the west front. And it had bought him, in the last fortnight alone, 11 descriptions of the same young woman from 11 separate correspondents, all of whom described her as an angel, and none of whom had mentioned that she had a sister. A title bought everything except one thing, and he had begun to suspect it could not be bought at all. Ferrers. Your Grace. When my mother arrives, she is not to be met at the front. Ferrers's horse shied at a pheasant. When he had it in hand again, he said, in the tone of a man reciting a date, Mrs. Legg has been informed. The reference is written. She comes as Mrs. Prue, in the 2nd week of hiring. In the still room, Juliana had lit the 2nd candle after all, because the ledger required it. The ledger was the only handsome thing left in the house. 9 years of her writing, small and upright, every column carried forward and every farthing accounted. Rents from the Ashcott fields and the mill lease and the tithe of the lower meadow. She had learned to keep books at 15 from a father who taught her because he had no son, and she had gone on keeping them at 23, when he died, because nobody else would. She dipped the pen, Michaelmas rents received. Against them, the coal, the physician, the roof over the east passage that had swallowed 40 pounds and still let in the rain. The door banged. Juliana! Where is the woman? Juliana! She finished the figure before she looked up. That habit had cost her a great deal over the years, and she had never once been able to break it. Lavinia Danvers came in ahead of 2 footmen who did not belong to the house and had not been paid by it. Bottle green silk, still travel-creased, purple gloves. The ostrich plume in her turban touched the low beam of the doorway and bent, and she put a hand up to save it as though saving a child. Clear the table. The table has the accounts on it. Then the accounts may go on the floor, where they have been keeping us these 9 years. Lavinia smiled. She always smiled first. Boxes. Here. Careful. Careful, you great ox. That is silver gauze. 4 boxes came down on the table, one after another, the last one across the open ledger. Juliana drew the book out from under it. She did it slowly, so that nothing tore. Sybil came in behind them at a run, cheeks pink from the carriage, and had the lids off before her mother could reach the string. Silver gauze over white satin, a tiara of pearls and a nest of paper, a painted ivory fan, satin slippers that had never touched a road. Mama, the sleeves. The sleeves are as they wear them at Almack's, exactly as she wrote. Stand up in it. There. Turn. Juliana closed the ledger and set it on the shelf beside the preserves. The gown went up over Sybil's head and came down in a sigh of silver, and for a moment the little candle-lit room held something that did not belong in it at all. A girl of 21 lit like a chandelier, dimple in her right chin, hair the color of new rope. Well, Sybil said, turning. Well, Juliana? It fits you. It is meant to do more than fit. Then it does more than fit. Sybil laughed and turned to the black window to find herself in the glass. Juliana looked at the boxes and at the labels on the boxes and read the name of the Bond Street house without appearing to read anything at all. 4 gowns from that house. 4 gowns from that house came to something near 200 pounds. She looked at her stepmother. Lavinia was watching her look. That was the thing about Lavinia. She always arranged to be watching. You wish to ask me how they were paid for, Lavinia said pleasantly. No, you do. I know how they were paid for. Juliana set the sewing box on top of the ledger. Sir Mallory signed. He signs everything. He has been signing since I was a girl, and he has never once paid, and the man who came to the gate this morning was not asking about gowns. Sybil's reflection went still in the window. A man came to the gate, she said, with a notice. What sort of notice? The sort that is nailed. Lavinia's smile did not move, but her hand did. A small closing of the purple glove on the edge of the table. Nailed where anyone might see it? On the gate. That is the purpose of a gate. You permitted that. I straightened it. Somewhere over their heads, a rafter shifted and dropped a little dust into the candle, and the flame ducked and came back. Lavinia crossed the floor. She was a tall woman, and she used it. She stopped close enough that Juliana could smell the violet powder and the damp of the road on the silk. "Listen to me," she said, very quietly, very kindly. "In 11 days there is a ball at Rochefort Hall. There is a duke in that house who has not been seen by a living soul in this county, who is said to be worth 400,000, and who must choose. When he chooses my daughter, every paper nailed to every post in Berkshire comes down in an afternoon. That is what those boxes are. They are not gowns, they are the roof. They are 200 pounds against a debt of 940. Then you understand the arithmetic and you may spare me the lecture." "I understand," Juliana said, "that if he does not choose her, we will have neither the roof nor the 200 pounds. The smile arrived then, fully, the way weather arrives. "How fortunate," Lavinia said, "that you will not be there to see it." She turned and began to fold the silver gauze back into its paper, and she folded it well, because she had been a moneylender's daughter in Reading before she was a baronet's wife, and her hands had never forgotten how to handle other people's goods. "Sybil, upstairs, the blue for tomorrow, we call on the Mortons. Juliana, the hem of your gray thing is coming down again at the back. Do see to it, it reflects on the house." They went out. The footman took the boxes. The door swung and settled. Juliana stood in the small quiet with her hand flat on the lid of her mother's sewing box. Then she took the ledger down again, opened it to the Ashcott column, and sat and wrote the date. She wrote until the candle was a stub and the mice began in the wainscot. Under Michaelmas rents received she entered the sum, and beside it, in the margin, in the same small upright hand, she wrote what she had written every quarter for 9 years and shown to no one. Paid to L.D., in full, no receipt given. At the bottom of the page she blotted, and closed the book, and did not go up at once. Above her the house was going to bed. Sybil's laugh came down through 2 floors. Marbury Grange had been built in the reign of Queen Anne by men who believed the family would go on forever, and it had 16 bedchambers, of which 4 had beds in them, and 1 long gallery in which the rain had begun to come through in a line, drop by drop, into a copper pan that Juliana emptied twice a day and had emptied twice a day since March. She went and emptied it now. At the turn of the gallery she met Sir Mallory Vane coming up from the cellar with a bottle under his arm and gout in his stride, silver-headed cane knocking the boards. "Ah, the clever one." He raised the bottle an inch. "Your father's Madeira. Keeping badly. It kept well enough until this year. Everything keeps well enough until this year." He laughed at his own joke and swayed. Then, more carefully, as men do when they wish a thing recorded, "You'll not be making difficulties over the Ashcott acres, Juliana. Girl needs a portion. Duke won't look at a portion of air." Juliana held the pan level. "The Ashcott acres," she said, "are not my mother's silver, sir. They are not in a drawer. They are in a settlement, and settlements are what lawyers say they are." He went past her, breathing wine. Amiable creature. Always were. She stood in the passage until the cellar door shut 2 floors below. Then she went down to the still room again, and took out the ledger a second time that night, and turned to the back where the fold of the binding held a single folded paper she had not looked at in 4 years. Her father's hand. The date, the field names, the words to my daughter Juliana, absolutely. She read it once, put it back, and set the ledger on the shelf behind the preserves, spine inward, where nobody who did not already know would ever think to look. Then she climbed the back stair to the room beside the garret, where the ceiling sloped so that she could stand upright only along one wall, and she set the candle on the sill and took the gray gown across her knees. The hem was down at the back. Her stepmother had been right about that, as she was always right about small things and never about large ones. Juliana threaded the needle at the 3rd attempt. Her eyes were not what they had been at 20. She set the first stitch. And her hand went to the shell cameo at her throat, the way it did, and stayed there a moment. It was her mother's. It was not worth 5 pounds. It had been valued twice, by 2 different men, both of whom had looked apologetic, and Lavinia had stopped asking after it in the year Juliana turned 28. The rain came harder against the little window. 5 miles off, at Rochefort Hall, the scaffolding on the west front creaked in the wind, and a light burned late in the steward's room, where Mrs. Honora Legg was writing out a character reference for a servant who did not exist. She wrote it in a plain hand, on plain paper, and she signed a name that was not hers, and she felt no guilt at all. because she had been told to, and because she kept secrets the way she kept the keys, in silence, and by order. When she had blotted it, she folded it, and looked at it for a moment on the desk. "Mrs. Prue," she said aloud, to the empty room, "God help the house." The invitations had already gone out, 60 of them, sealed in Rochefort wax, riding out that night in a boy's satchel across half of Berkshire, and one of them, addressed to the Danvers of Marbury Grange, was at that moment 9 miles away, and coming closer through the wet dark. In the room beside the garret, the candle guttered. Juliana finished the hem. She bit the thread, shook the gown out, and held it up in the small light. The 10-year-old cut, the high bodice nobody had worn since Waterloo, the 3 men's across the skirt where the cloth had gone at the fold. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she folded it, laid it in the press, and blew out the candle, without once having said aloud the thing she had been thinking since the boxes came down on her ledger, which was not that she wanted a gown, and not that she wanted a ball. She was 32 years old. She had run a house for 9 years that did not consider her a member of it, and she had never in the whole of her life been in a room where anyone looked up when she came in. In the morning, she was at the copper pan before the servants were down, and she was still standing under the leak with the pan in both hands, when Bess came running the length of the gallery with her cap askew, holding something at arm's length as though it might go off. Miss, from Rochefort Hall." The seal was scarlet. It had not been broken. Juliana set the pan down on the boards. The drip went on into the wood, and she did not hear it. Lavinia Danvers came down the stairs with her hand out before she had finished the last 3 steps. "Give it here." Bess gave it. Lavinia turned the letter over twice, held the scarlet seal to the window light, and something in her jaw loosened when she made out the shape pressed into the wax. The Rochefort stag, quartered, with the ring of the coronet above it. She broke it against the sill. Juliana stood where she was, the copper pan at her feet, the water beginning again into the boards. "Read it aloud, Mamma," Sybil said from the landing. She had come out in her dressing gown with her hair still in papers, and she leaned on the rail, the way a woman leans on the rail of a ship coming into harbor. Lavinia read it silently first. That was her way. She read anything of consequence once for herself before she let the room have it, and by the time she looked up, her face had arranged itself into the expression she wore in church. A ball, the 14th, Rochefort Hall. She let the paper drop an inch. The Duke is in residence. Sybil came down the stairs so fast one of the papers came loose from her hair. He never is. He never is in residence, everyone says so. He has not opened that house since. He has opened it now. Lavinia folded the letter along its crease with 2 fingers. And he has written to us. She said and she meant a smaller word than that. Juliana, standing 4 feet away with her sleeves rolled to the elbow and her hands still red from the cold of the pan, understood the arithmetic of the pronoun before either of them looked at her. The letter was addressed to the Danvers family of Marbury Grange. Lavinia read the direction twice more that morning, and each time her eye went over family, the way a horse goes over a low fence, without noticing it was there. By noon, the house had changed weather entirely. The bailiff's notice was still nailed to the gate. Juliana had walked down at dawn and read it again in the wet, the black letters run a little at the edges, but nobody in the drawing room mentioned it. Lavinia had the London boxes brought up from the hall and opened on the carpet, silver gauze, white satin, a tiara of seed pearls in a case lined with blue paper. "The gauze," Sybil said, "with the pearls." "The gauze," Lavinia agreed, "and you will not eat after Tuesday." Juliana carried the tea in because there was nobody left to carry it. She set the tray down on the pier table and stood a moment with the letter's direction still in her head, and she said, to the room, in an even voice, "What hour does it begin?" The talk stopped. Lavinia turned her head slowly. She had a way of turning her head that made the movement cost something. "Begin? The ball. 9. Lavinia let that sit. "For those attending." Sybil laughed. It was a light sound, not cruel, which somehow made it worse. She laughed the way one laughs when a dog does something clever, and she went back to the gauze. "Juliana." Lavinia set her cup down without a sound. "You will not think of it. The invitation is to the family. The invitation is to a house that has one gentlewoman in it of marriageable rank, and one unmarried girl of 21. Lavinia smoothed the silk across her knee. You are 32. You are in a gown I remember from before your father died, and you have hands like a sempstress. Do you know what they would say? No. They would say Marbury has fallen so far it sends its housekeeper to a duke's ball. She looked up, and her eyes were very round and very light. And they would be correct. I will not have it laughed at, not this month. Juliana's hands stayed at her sides. She did not clasp them. That was the whole of what showed. Then I am not to go. You are not to go. Lavinia returned to the silk. Sybil, stand up. The hem is long by 1.5 inches. There was a fourth person in the room, and nobody had spoken to him for 1/4 of an hour. Augustus Ferrars sat by the window with a red leather case across his knees and his spectacles down his nose, and he had been watching the invitation since it came into the room, the way a man watches a pot he is not permitted to touch. He had ridden from Reading that morning with 3 questions about the Marbury mortgage, and had been made to wait in a passage for 2 hours. He wrote nothing down. He simply looked, once, at Juliana's hands, and once at the 4 dress boxes, and let the arithmetic stand. What he did not say was that he had come from Rochford Hall, and that his employer had asked him 1 question about this house, and had not liked any part of the answer. Ferrars rose, bowed to nobody in particular, and let himself out. The 14th came in wet. It had rained since Tuesday, a soft, patient Berkshire rain that did not fall so much as stand in the air, and by 6 in the evening, the lane below Marbury was running like a gutter. Sybil went down the steps at 7 under 3 umbrellas held by 3 separate people, her slippers carried in a bag so they should not touch the gravel. Lavinia went after her in bottle green silk and purple gloves. The hired chaise took them, and the wheels threw water over the doorstep, and then the drive was empty, and the house was very large and very quiet. Honora Legge came out of the passage with the keys at her waist, and found Juliana standing in the hall in the biscuit muslin. The housekeeper stopped. You've mended it again. 3 places. That gown was old when your mother wore it. Yes. Juliana was pulling on the cotton gloves, and the darn across the right knuckle showed as she worked the finger down. How far is it by the field path? Mrs. Legg's mouth thinned. 3 miles by the field path, 5 by the lane, and the lane is under water at Coombe. Then the field path. Miss Juliana. Yes. The 2 women looked at each other in the dark hall. Honora Legge had come to Marbury as a girl of 19 under the first Mrs. Danvers, and she had watched a great many things in this house that she had not been asked her opinion of, and she had said nothing about any of them for 20 years. She went to the press by the door and came back with a brown wool shawl. The stile at Ledger's is broken on the far side. Go over at the gap. She put the shawl into Juliana's hands and did not let go of it at once. And you'll not go up the front steps in that. No, Juliana said. I know what door I go in by. She went out into it. The rain took her at the gate and did not let her go for 1.5 hours. It came through the shawl in the first 10 minutes, and through the muslin soon after, and the field path, which was a good path in August, was 6 inches of clay by the second field. She went over the gap at Ledger's with both hands on the wet stone. Her slippers were gone before Coombe Bottom. The sole of the left one gave at the seam, and she walked the last 2 miles feeling every flint through the lining, and she did not stop, because stopping in that cold would have finished it. She thought about turning back exactly once, at the top of Coombe Rise, where the wind came across open ground and drove the rain flat. Below her, 3/4 of a mile off, Rochford Hall stood with every window in the south front lit. She had never seen so much light in one place. 9 tall windows on the piano nobile burning yellow through the rain, the lamps along the carriage sweep, the small moving lights of link boys running beside the chaises. Music came up the hill in pieces. The wind took most of it and gave back a bar at a time, a violin, then nothing, then the low shape of a great many people talking, in a great many voices at once. Juliana stood on Coombe Rise in a soaked gown with her hair coming down and water running off her chin. Then she went down the hill. She did not go near the carriage sweep. She came in along the ha-ha, through the kitchen garden, past the frames and the espaliered pears, and she found the service door under the east arch by the smell of it, roasting meat and coal and hot copper, coming out of a door propped open with a brick, because the passage behind it was near enough to kill a man with heat. 2 footmen went past her carrying a tray of ices and neither looked at her. That told her everything about what she looked like. The still room was on the left, 3 steps down, and it was empty except for one woman. She was old and short and broad, with red apples of cheeks and a lace cap gone slightly gray at the frill, and she was sitting on a stool at the deal table with a pot of tea in front of her, and her clogs off. Her feet were up on the rung. When the door opened, she looked round without hurrying. "Well," said the woman, "you've swum here." "I walked." "From where?" "Marbury." The old woman's eyebrows went up half an inch and came back down. She put her clogs on, went to the copper, and came back with a towel that had been drying on the rail. She did not ask a second question. She put the towel in Juliana's hands, pulled the second stool out with her foot, and poured a second cup. "Sit. You'll drip on the floor either way. You may as well drip sitting." Juliana sat. Her hands would not do the towel properly. They had gone past cold into something clumsier, and after a moment, the old woman took the towel back and wrung the worst of the water out of the ends of Juliana's hair herself, quickly, the way one does with a child, and said nothing about it. "Drink that." The tea was strong enough to stand a spoon in. Juliana drank half of it before she could speak. "Thank you, I'm Prue," said the old woman. "Mrs. Prue took on this week for the ball. Half the staff in this house is took on this week for the ball, so nobody knows anybody, which suits me." She sat back down. Her gray eyes went over the biscuit muslin, the high bodice, the hem, the 3 men's. "That's a good gown." "It is a very old gown." "I know what it is. Empire cut 40 pound of muslin when it was new, and somebody's put 3 men's in it that I'd have to hold to the window to find." Mrs. Prue put her cup down. "Who did that?" "I did." Said Mrs. Prue. Upstairs the music changed. Feet went over the ceiling in a long roll, and a door opened somewhere and let a wave of noise down the back stairs and then shut it off. "They're going into the first set," said Mrs. Prue. "Are you meant to be up there?" Juliana turned the cup around on the table. "The invitation was to my father's house." "That's not what I asked." "No." Juliana looked up. "I was told not to come." "By who?" "My stepmother." Mrs. Prue took that in without any change of face at all, which was itself a kind of skill. "And you walked 3 miles in this?" "5. The lane is out at Coombe." The old woman laughed once, low, and it was a warmer sound than anything Juliana had heard in a fortnight. "And what did you mean to do when you got here, child? Come up the back stairs and dance in a wet muslin?" "No." Juliana set the cup down. "I meant to stand in the gallery above the ballroom, where the musician's door is, and look at it for an hour, and walk home." The still room was quiet. "Why?" Juliana was a long time answering. "Because there is a notice nailed to my gate," she said, "and in 3 weeks I do not know what house I sleep in, and I wanted to see one room, once, with all the candles lit, before it goes." Mrs. Prue did not say anything kind. That was the mercy of her. She got up, went to the shelf, and came back with a plate of cold chicken and half a loaf and put it down at Juliana's elbow like a fact. "Eat that, you'll not get up any stairs on tea." They sat an hour. The old woman talked and asked, and did not seem to be asking. She asked how many were in the house at Marbury, and Juliana said 4 indoor now, where there had been 11. She asked who did the accounts, and Juliana said she did. She asked what a bailiff's notice on a gate at Marbury came to in figures, and Juliana told her the figure, 4,200, and the mortgage under it besides, and only afterwards thought it strange that a woman hired for a week should ask. She did not think it strange for long, because she was warm for the first time in 9 hours, and because there was a thing happening in that still room that had not happened to Juliana Danvers in a decade, and she had no name ready for it. Somebody was listening to her.
"And the girl," said Mrs. Prue.
"The stepsister. She's up there tonight in the silver." "Sybil, yes." "Pretty?" "Very. Kind." Juliana turned the cup around again and did not answer, and that was the answer. Mrs. Prue's gray eyes rested on her for a moment longer than was comfortable. What she did not say was that she had been sitting in that still room since 6 o'clock for the express purpose of hearing exactly this, that she had chosen the cap herself out of a box in the linen room, and that her own name, the name she had signed for 40 years, was not Prue. A bell went in the passage, 3 short pulls. That's the supper room. The old woman was up off her stool faster than a woman of 61 ought to be. She took the plate, put it in the sink, pulled the lace cap straight, and jerked her chin at the inner door. Up those. Turn left at the top, past the linen press, and there's a door on your right that gives onto the north gallery. Nobody goes in it during a ball but the musician's boy, and he's drunk. Juliana stood. Her gown had begun to dry in stiff shapes, and her hair was down her back in ropes. Mrs. Prue, go on with you. Why? The old woman stopped with her hand on the door. Because I've been in this house 4 days, she said, and you're the first one who sat down at that table and said thank you before you said anything else. She pushed the door open onto the noise. Left at the top. Mind the 3rd stair, it's short. The back stairs were narrow and hot, and went up in the dark. Juliana came out on a landing stacked with linen, turned left, found the door, and put her hand on it. Then she opened it. The north gallery ran the whole length of the ballroom, 20 feet above the floor, behind a stone balustrade, and the light came up through the balusters in bars. Juliana went to the rail and looked down and did not move for a long moment. 400 candles, 8 chandeliers of them, and the floor beneath running with color. 60 couples down the length of the room in 2 lines, the women turning, silk and gauze and gold, the whole thing moving to one time like water going over a weir. She could see Sybil from above, silver gauze, pearls, her chin lifted, second from the top of the set. She could see Lavinia against the wall in bottle green with her fan going. Juliana put both hands on the cold stone of the balustrade and stood there in her ruined muslin, with her heart going hard, and for the length of that dance she was not thinking about the notice on the gate. Directly below her, 6 feet inside the ballroom door, a footman stood with a tray of glasses. He was a very tall footman, brown serge livery, service apron, a short powdered wig that did not sit right, white gloves. He had been standing there through the whole of the set with the tray perfectly level and his eyes going along the room in a slow, unhurried sweep, and twice he had spoken 3 words to another servant and the other servant had gone away at a run. His right hand, gloved, carried a thin scar across the back that the glove did not quite cover. He had come to that door 40 minutes ago and had not intended to stay. Then someone had opened the still room door 2 floors below and let a scrap of conversation up the service stair, and one of the voices had been his mother's, and the other had been a stranger's, saying a figure, 4,200, in a tone with no self-pity in it whatsoever. Piers Onslow, 9th Duke of Rochefort, stood in his own ballroom in another man's coat and looked up. The gallery was dark. He could make out a hand on the balustrade and the pale line of an arm, and nothing else. He set the tray down on the console, turned to the under-butler at his elbow, and said quietly, "Who is in the north gallery?" "Nobody, sir. It's shut for the ball." "Somebody is in the north gallery." The under-butler looked up, saw nothing, and said what under-butlers say. "I'll send a man." "You will not." The footman's voice did not rise, and the under-butler, who had been in service 30 years and had never taken an order from a livery, found himself standing very straight. "Fetch Mr. Ferrars. He is in the library with a red case. Tell him to bring the Marbury papers, not the Danvers marriage settlement. The Marbury papers, and tell him I want the name of every person resident in that house. Sir, now." And 2 floors below, at the foot of the back stairs, Mrs. Prue was untying a coarse linen apron with hands that had not held a scrubbing brush in 40 years, and she was smiling at the wall like a woman who has just been handed the one card she needed. The candles in the great hall of Rochefort went in at 6 the following evening, and Juliana Danvers carried the tray of them because no one had told her to stop. She had come back. That was the plain shape of it. Mrs. Prue had sent word to Marbury Grange by a boy with a cleft lip and a shilling, and the word had said only that the housekeeper wanted 3 pairs of steady hands for the ball, and that the pay was 4 shillings and supper. Lavinia had read the note aloud at breakfast and laughed until her tea slopped. Then she had said, "Go. It will do you good to see what a real house looks like before you die in ours." So Juliana went. She walked the 5 kilometers again, dry this time, and she did not take the front avenue. In the servants' passage, she tied a borrowed apron over the biscuit muslin and pushed the 2 loose strands of hair behind her ears with the back of her wrist. Honora Legg inspected her the way a farrier inspects a hoof. "You are gentry," the housekeeper said. I am hungry, Juliana said. Mrs. Legg's keys shifted at her waist. That will do. The tapers were beeswax, 40 dozen of them, and Juliana set each one straight before she lit it. She had a method: thumb at the base, a quarter turn, then the flame. By the 12th sconce, a footman in fawn serge had begun to hand her the tapers before she reached for them. He was very tall, his wig sat badly, powdered short, and the white gloves did not fit across the knuckles of his right hand, where a thin scar ran like a seam. He said nothing for a long while, neither did she. You count them, he said at last. Someone should. Legge counts them. Then someone should count them twice. She took the next taper from him. There were 384 this morning. There are 371 now. The footman's hand stilled in the box. 13. Beeswax sells at 8 pence the pound in Newbury Market. She turned the taper, lit it, moved on. I do not say who. I say 13. He watched her go up the ladder in her mended hem, and what he did not say was that he had asked Legge for that figure at noon and been given a shrug. Piers Onslow, 9th Duke of Rochefort, had worn his own livery for 4 days now. It had begun as his mother's idea and had continued as his own. He had buried a wife once who had been chosen for him from a paper, and he had promised over that grave that the next paper would be signed only after he had seen the woman's hands, when she thought no one of consequence was looking. Ferrers had the contract in the red leather case. Ferrers had orders not to open it. At 7 the carriages began to arrive. Juliana was sent to the passage behind the card room with a jug and a cloth, and from there she heard her stepmother enter Rochefort Hall. Danvers, Lavinia announced to the footman at the door, of Marbury Grange, in the county, and my daughter Miss Sybil Vane Danvers, who is expected. Nobody had expected her. Juliana had read the invitation herself, in the hall at Marbury, before it was taken from her hand. Sybil came in on the arm of Sir Mallory Vane, silver gauze over white satin, pearls in her hair, and she stopped beneath the chandelier for a moment longer than walking required. The ostrich plume on Lavinia's turban trembled with satisfaction. In the passage, Juliana set down the jug and wiped a ring of wine from the shelf. Her hands were quite steady. She noticed that they were steady, and something in her chest went cold and clear, like water under ice. Mrs. Prue found her there. The old woman had a smudge of ash on her cheek and a scrubbing brush in her fist she had plainly never used. You will want to see the ballroom, she said. There is a gallery. The music is better from above and nobody looks up. I have candles. You have a quarter hour? I stole it for you. Mrs. Prue's gray eyes did not blink. Come. The gallery ran the length of the north wall, dusty, hung with a family of Onslows in oils who had all been painted with the same disapproving mouth. Below, the floor filled. Juliana leaned on the rail. Mrs. Prue leaned beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, which no servant would have done with a lady, and no lady would have permitted from a servant. That one, Mrs. Prue said. The silver girl. She is yours? My father's second wife's daughter. Ah, not yours then. She was 6 when I plaited her hair for her first assembly. Juliana watched Sybil laugh at something Sir Mallory said, and turn her fan so the laugh could be seen from 3 sides of the room. She learned the plaiting. She did not learn the rest. Below, a footman crossed the floor with a tray and did not look up. Juliana knew the walk before she knew the man. She had seen it that afternoon carrying a candle box. Your tall one, she said. The scarred hand. He does not bend his knees. Mrs. Prue's mouth twitched. Bad training. Bad acting. The old woman turned her head slowly. Say that again, girl. He hands things down. Juliana did not take her eyes from the floor. A footman holds a tray up so the guest may take. He holds it down so the guest may be served. That is a man used to giving. She straightened from the rail. I have candles. She was 3 steps toward the stair when Mrs. Prue said, What is your name? Juliana Danvers. Ursula Prue, said the Dowager Duchess of Rochefort, and put out a hand roughened with nothing but 61 years, and Juliana shook it because she had been raised to shake a hand that was offered. Downstairs, Augustus Ferrers had taken up his post beside the marble console with the red leather case under his arm and his spectacles at the end of his nose. He had drafted 17 betrothal contracts in his career. He disliked this one for reasons he had not yet organized into words, and he was a man who did not act until his words were in order. The dancing began at 9. Juliana carried ratafia. That was the whole of her office. A tray, a circuit of the ballroom's edge, and the discipline not to be seen. She learned the room the way she had learned the household books at Marbury, by what did not balance. Sir Mallory Vane took 3 glasses in 11 minutes and grew redder. Lavinia spoke to the Countess of Wexford for 6 minutes and to no one else for 40, because no one else would stop. And Sybil danced twice with a baronet's son, then stood by the fire and asked a passing maid, quite pleasantly, whether the Duke had come down yet. "His Grace does not dance, miss," said the maid. "Then he shall learn," said Sybil, and everyone near enough laughed, and Juliana, 4 feet behind with the tray, heard the sentence go into the room and stay there. At 10:30, a glass went over on the card table and a voice rose. "Girl, girl." Sir Mallory had his stick up. The maid on her knees under the table was 14 and had already begun to cry. "That is claret on my breeches, you clumsy." "It is brandy," Juliana said. The table turned. She stood in a borrowed apron with a tray at her hip and did not lower her eyes. "You spilled brandy an hour ago on the same knee, sir. This is claret from the girl. The claret is on your boot." She set the tray down, went to one knee, and lifted the fragments into her palm one at a time, largest first, so the small ones would not be driven into the carpet. "The stain will lift with salt. I will bring salt." Sir Mallory's stick lowered, because it did not know what else to do. Behind him, the tall footman with the badly fitting gloves stepped forward with a cloth, knelt, and held the edge of the carpet up so she could reach beneath it. Neither of them looked at the other. Their hands worked 8 inches apart for perhaps 30 seconds. "The corner," she said. "I have it. Lift, do not drag. Yes." When she rose, her knuckles were bleeding in one place, and she pressed it against the apron without appearing to. The footman saw. He said nothing. He carried the fragments out. Lavinia found her in the passage 2 minutes later and took her wrist. "You spoke." He was going to strike her. "You spoke, in that dress, in front of Lady Wexford, and you gave your name." "I gave no name." "You are a Danvers." Lavinia's fingers ground the bone. "Sybil is being looked at tonight. Looked at, Juliana, by people who write letters. If one of them learns that the sister sweeps floors for 4 shillings. Stepsister." The turban plume shivered. "Get to the kitchen. Stay in it." Juliana went to the kitchen. She stayed in it for 11 minutes, which was as long as it took to find the salt, and then she came back up the servant's stair with the salt in a bowl, because she had said she would. The Duke was on the half landing. He had taken off the wig. He had not put on anything else. Still the fawn serge, still the apron over it, and his black hair pushed back gray at the temples. And in that light, nobody who had seen the portrait in the gallery could have mistaken him for a footman. Juliana had seen the portrait in the gallery. She stopped on the 3rd stair with the salt bowl in both hands. He watched her understand. He watched her decide. 371, she said. 369 now. 2 broke in the box. Then it was never 13, it was 15, and 11 of them are in the under-butler's coat, because he stands with his left arm held out from his side, and he did not do that on Tuesday. The Duke of Rochefort put his hand on the banister rail. The scar on it caught the light. "You knew this afternoon." "I knew the candles this afternoon. I knew you an hour ago." "How?" "You said 13 back to me like a man checking a ledger." She came up 1 stair. A footman would have said nothing at all, or he would have said it was not his business, or he would have named the thief to be safe. "You wanted the number. And you gave it to a stranger in livery." "I gave it to whoever was going to do something with it." Somewhere below, the orchestra began a boulanger, and the floor filled with the sound of 40 pairs of feet. "Why are you here, Miss Danvers?" he said. "You are not staff." "I am cheaper than staff." She held out the bowl. "Salt, for the carpet. You will want it done before the dancing ends or it sets." He did not take it. "Answer me." 4 shillings and supper. Her chin came up. The 2 loose strands had fallen again and she did not put them back. "And because I was not permitted to come through the front door, and I wished to see the room." "Whose permission?" "You know whose." She said it downstairs, twice, at the volume she keeps for it. Piers Onslow had spent 4 days in this house, learning who its visitors were when they believed themselves unobserved, and he had learned a great deal and liked none of it. He took the salt bowl from her at last. Their fingers did not touch. He arranged that they did not. "You will finish the evening in the gallery," he said, "not on the floor. I was engaged for the floor. You were engaged by Mrs. Legge, who takes her orders from me." "From your Duke," Juliana said. There was a pause of exactly the wrong length. "Yes," he said, "from my Duke." She went past him up the stairs. At the top she turned. The thin man by the console with the red case. "He has opened it twice and shut it without reading. A clerk does not do that." She let one hand rest on the rail. "Whatever is in it, he does not want it signed tonight either." Then she was gone into the dark of the gallery, and Piers stood on the half landing holding a bowl of salt like an idiot in a play. He found his mother in the still room at midnight, elbow deep in a bucket she had no reason to be near. "You have taken off the wig," Ursula said, without turning. "I have." "To whom?" "The Danvers woman." "Ah." The Dowager Duchess wrung out a cloth. "The elder, the one they have made into furniture. You have spoken with her." "I have shaken her hand." Ursula turned around, ash on the cheek, cheap lace cap, and under it, the face that had frightened 3 prime ministers. "Piers, the girl in the silver gauze asked me tonight to fetch her fan from the carriage. Then she asked me whether the Duke was ugly. Then she said, and I set it down for you word for word, she said, 'It hardly signifies. One does not have to look at a title.'" Piers said nothing. "And the mother," Ursula went on, "has told Lady Wexford that Marbury Grange runs to 900 a year clear." She laid the cloth over the rim of the bucket. "It runs to nothing. There is a bill of sale nailed to the gate. I sent Fowler past it on Thursday. Ferrers has the contract. Ferrers has been standing in the same square foot of marble since 8 o'clock, like a man at a funeral. He arranged himself." Ursula came close and put a red, wet hand flat on her son's serge chest. "Do not sign, boy. I had not intended to sign tonight. Do not sign at all until you know what that house is truly worth, and to whom." She looked up at him. "The elder one counted my linen tonight, unasked. 62 sheets. She told Legge 11 were rotten and could be cut down for pillow slips. She counts things. She counts things nobody has ever paid her to count." Ursula's chin set. "That is not a virtue in a wife, Piers. That is a woman who has been keeping a house alive alone for a long time." The last carriage rolled out of Rochford at 3. Juliana came down from the gallery with the borrowed apron folded over her arm and 4 shillings in her palm. Honora Legge stood at the foot of the back stairs with a covered basket and an expression that had been ironed as flat as her apron. "Supper," said the housekeeper. "You did not eat." "I was told the gallery." "You were told the gallery by his—" Mrs. Legge stopped. "By the head footman." Juliana took the basket. "Mrs. Legge, the 11 candles are in Perrin's coat." The keys went still. "Do not turn him off tonight," Juliana said. "Turn him off Monday, after the plate is counted, or he will take the plate on Sunday to spite you." Mrs. Legge looked at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, from a woman who had served 3 generations of Onslows and had never once done it for a person who arrived through the scullery, came a curtsy. Juliana walked out into the dark with a basket on her arm and the cameo cold at her throat. She was 100 yards down the avenue when a horse came up behind her, and it was not a servant's horse. He rode beside her at a walk, in a dark greatcoat with the double collar turned up, and he did not offer to take her up, which she noted, and was grateful for, and would have refused. 5 kilometers, he said. 4.5 by the field path. There is a moon. There is. They went perhaps 200 yards in silence, hoof and shoe on gravel. "Miss Danvers, your father's estate, Marbury Grange." He kept his eyes ahead. "Who holds the mortgage?" "A house in the city. Grieve and nephew." Her voice did not change. "My stepmother signs. I am not permitted to see the instrument." "And the rents?" "There are none. The tenants were bought out in the spring for a sum I never saw entered." Now she did stop walking and looked up at him, and the moon was behind her so he could see nothing of her face but the line of the jaw. "Why do you ask me that at 4 in the morning on a public road?" "Because you will not lie to me," he said, "and everyone else in that house will." She started walking again. At the turn of the lane she said, without stopping, "You should ask the thin man with the red case what a dowry is made of. Ask him tonight. He will tell you tonight, and by Tuesday he will have found his manners, and he will not." Piers Onslow reined in and let her go. He sat the horse until she was a gray mark on the road, and then a nothing, and then he turned back at a gallop, and he came into the library at Rochefort still in his greatcoat, and found Augustus Ferrars awake at the desk with the red leather case open at last, and every candle in the room lit. "Your Grace," Ferrars said, his spectacles were pushed up into what remained of his hair, "I have been waiting since 8 o'clock for you to ask me." "Ask you what?" The lawyer turned the case around so the papers faced the door. "What the dowry is made of." Ferrars laid the first sheet under the candle and turned it with one finger, the way a man turns a card he has already seen. "Berkshire," he said, 412 acres. The home farm, the water meadow, the 2 cottages on the Wallingford Road, and the mill. He moved a second sheet on top of it. "Conveyed to Miss Sybil Vane Danvers upon her marriage, free of encumbrance as the whole of her portion." Pierce had not taken off his greatcoat. Wet wool steamed where he stood too near the fire. "Then, Lady Danvers is richer than she dresses." "Lady Danvers," said Ferrars, "does not own one clod of it." The lawyer took up the third paper. It was older than the others, the ink gone brown at the folds, and he handled it differently, with both hands. Marbury Grange and its lands were settled in 1803 on Cordelia Marbury at her marriage to Colonel Danvers, settled on her, not on him. The colonel had the use of the rents in his lifetime and no more. He set it down. Cordelia died in 1811. The estate passed entire to the daughter of her body. Juliana Danvers, sole issue of the first marriage. Ferrars pushed his spectacles down onto his nose at last, which was how he looked at men rather than paper. The colonel married again the following year. Lady Lavinia was never anything at Marbury but the widow of a man who had a life interest in another woman's land, and that interest died with him in 1815. The fire took a log down with a soft collapse. Neither man looked at it. "Say the rest," Pierce said. "For 11 years the rents of Marbury have been collected in the name of Lady Danvers, and entered in her books as her own. The stewards are paid by her. The tenants pay her." Ferrars's voice stayed perfectly level, which was his way of shouting. "And the settlement she proposes to make on Miss Sybil is a settlement of land that belongs, this night, at this hour, to the woman who mends the tablecloths." Pierce put his hand flat on the desk. The signet caught the candle and threw a small, hard shape of light onto the ceiling. "She is giving away her stepdaughter's inheritance," he said, "as a bribe to bring a duke into the family." "She is giving away a thing she has no power to give," Ferrars said, "which is worse. Sign that contract, Your Grace, and you sign a fraud. In 7 years some clerk finds the settlement of 1803, and the marriage of the House of Onslow is discovered to rest on a theft. Your sons would spend their lives explaining it." There was a long silence in the library at Rochefort. Then the Duke laughed, once, without any pleasure in it at all, and sat down on the edge of the desk like a man 20 years younger and considerably worse mannered. "Ask him tonight," he said. "She told me to ask you tonight." "She said tonight?" "She said by Tuesday you would have found your manners." Ferrars took off his spectacles and polished them on his cuff for rather longer than the glass required. "Then Miss Danvers understands lawyers better than most of my clients do." The clock in the hall struck 5. Somewhere below, a scullery maid raked out a grate, and the sound came up through the floor like a small animal in a wall. "How much does she know?" Pierce asked. "I would say she knows the shape of it, and not the words. A woman does not ask a stranger about the water meadow being let out in the spring unless she has been counting something for years and getting the wrong answer." Ferrars hooked the spectacles back on. "She has no document. Lady Danvers will have seen to that. Then we get the document. Doctors' Commons has the will. Somerset House has the settlement. The parish register at Marbury has her mother's marriage." Ferrars was already reaching for a fresh sheet, and he was already writing. 4 days to London and back, if the roads hold. Pierce stood. "Take the small carriage. Take my name if any clerk gives you trouble." He was at the door before he turned. "And Ferrars, the contract of betrothal does not leave that case. Your Grace, I am a lawyer of 55 years. Nothing leaves my case that I did not put there." A pause. "Though I would remark that the case was open when you came in." "I noticed." "I opened it at 8 o'clock, Ferrars said, "because at 8 o'clock a footman came into this room to trim the candles and stood at that window with his back to me for 4 full minutes. And no footman on earth trims candles at a window." Piers looked at the window. "That was me," he said. "I know it was, Your Grace. I have been your mother's attorney since before you could ride." Ferrars dipped the pen. "You have her hands. It is a great pity. It will hang you one day." 2 floors above, in a bedchamber with the shutters latched, the Dowager Duchess Ursula Onslow sat on the edge of a servant's cot in a brown serge gown and did not undress. She had come up the back stairs at 4. Her cap was on the pillow beside her. The keys she had been given as a new maid-of-all-work lay across her knee, and she turned them over one at a time with a thumb, the way another woman might count beads, and what she was counting was the evening. She had carried a tray past Lady Lavinia Danvers 7 times and been looked at exactly none. She had held Miss Sibyl's fan for 11 minutes at the edge of the ballroom while Miss Sibyl danced, and when Miss Sibyl came back she had taken the fan without a word and struck her lightly on the wrist with it for holding it too long in a warm hand. And a woman in a mended muslin gown the color of old biscuit had sat in the servants' hall at 2:30, poured tea for a maid she had never met, and pushed the last of the bread and butter across the board, saying, "Take it. You have been on your feet since 5, I have not." Ursula turned the keys over again. She had come to Berkshire to find out whether the girl her son proposed to marry was fit to be a duchess. She had her answer, and she had had it before midnight, and she had stayed on because a second question had opened underneath the first one like a trap door. Somebody knocked at the door in the particular way of a man who has never in his life had to knock quietly. "Come," she said. Piers came in and shut it and stood with his back against it. "Mother, you look like a groom who has been out all night." "I have been out all night." "Then say it standing," said the dowager, "because I am too old to be gentled." He said it standing. The 412 acres, the settlement of 1803, the 11 years of rents, the dowry. Ursula Onslow listened without moving, and at the end of it she set the keys down on the cot beside her, very carefully, as though they had become heavy. "The bread and butter," she said. "What?" "She gave me her supper. She had walked 5 miles in the rain to come to a house she had been forbidden, and she came in at the kitchen door, and she sat down with the servants and gave a strange woman her supper." The dowager's chin came up, and every mouthful of it was bought with the rent of her own water meadow, and she does not know it. She half knows it. Half-knowing is worse. Half-knowing is what keeps a woman polite for 11 years. Ursula stood. She was 5 feet and a little, and in brown serge, and the room seemed to shrink around her. "Piers, what did you feel?" "At the gate, when they put up the notice of execution and she went on sewing." He did not answer at once. "I thought she had given up," he said. "And now?" "Now I think she was mending the only thing left in that house that was hers." "Yes," said his mother. "Now sit down and tell me what you have done about the debts, because you have done something. You have had that look since Thursday, and I have been waiting for you to be honest with me." He sat on the room's one chair, which creaked. "I bought them," he said. "All of them?" "Every note Lady Danvers has signed in 11 years. The mortgage on Marbury from Coutts, £240 to a Reading corn merchant. The dressmaker in Bruton Street, who was owed since March and was glad to see me. Sir Mallory Vane's bond for 600, which he pledged against her rents and which she was fool enough to countersign." He turned the signet on his finger. "The whole of it stands in my name since Monday morning. I did it to know what I was marrying into. And instead?" "And instead," said the Duke of Rochford, "I am the largest creditor of a woman who is about to give me stolen land as a wedding gift, and the land she is stealing belongs to the only person in Berkshire who has told me the truth." The Dowager Duchess crossed to the window and unlatched the shutter herself, which no duchess had done for her in 40 years, and grey light came into the room and made her face plain and old and entirely awake. "Then you own her," she said. "I own the debt." "Do not be delicate with me, Piers. It is 5 in the morning. You hold the paper on Marbury Grange. You may foreclose on Monday and put Lavinia Danvers and her daughter on the Wallingford Road, in the clothes they stand in, and no magistrate in England would trouble you for it." "Yes, and you will not." "No. Why?" "Because if I foreclose," he said, "Juliana Danvers loses her mother's house from my hand instead of theirs, and she will thank me for it, and I will not have that." He looked up. "I want it given back to her, not rescued, given back. with the deed in her hand and the whole county watching. Ursula Onslow was quiet for a moment. "That will take longer," she said, "and it will cost her more." "I know." "They will hurt her in the interval. Lavinia will smell the money changing hands, and she will not know where it went, and she will look about her for someone to blame, and there is only one person in that house who has never been able to answer back." The dowager's fingers found the edge of the cheap lace cap on the pillow. "You are proposing to leave her in the fire while you build the door." "Yes," said Piers, "that is what I am proposing." "Then you will not leave her alone in it." She picked the cap up and put it on, and tied it under her chin, and became a servant again in the space of 4 seconds. "I am going back to Marbury with her." He came out of the chair. "You are the Dowager Duchess of Rochford." "I am a maid of all work, called Prue, and Mrs. Legge, the housekeeper at Marbury, is short-handed since Michaelmas, and mentioned it twice in the servants' hall, and I have taken a place at £11 the year." She tucked a white curl out of sight. "It is less than I pay my own scullery girl. I intend to complain about it constantly. It will be very convincing." "Mother." "Piers Onslow." Ursula turned round. "That house has been robbing a woman since before you inherited, in front of the servants, in front of the parson, in front of every soul in the parish, and not one of them said a word, because she was poor and quiet and mending things. I have spent one night in it, and I could not sleep." She took up the keys. "Somebody is going to be in that room when it happens. I would rather it were me." There was nothing left to say, and he had the sense to say nothing. At the door she stopped. "You will need to be inside as well," she said, "not calling in a carriage. Inside, where they speak freely. Marbury has no footmen. She dismissed them in the spring. Marbury is giving a dinner on the 14th for the betrothal that has not been signed," said the Dowager, "and Lady Danvers has already written to Rochford to beg the loan of 2 of your people, because she cannot have the county see her serve soup with a boot boy." She let that sit. "Send 2. Be one of them." 3 days later, Augustus Ferrars came back from London at 9 in the evening with mud to the axle and a red leather case he would not give to the man who opened the carriage door. He came into the library and put 3 documents on the table and stood over them with his hat still on. The will of Cordelia Marbury Danvers, proved at Doctors' Commons, 1811. The marriage settlement of 1803, recited entire, with the trustees named. He laid the 3rd down, and this one was a copy in a clerk's round hand, with a parish seal upon it. And the register of Marbury Parish, certified by the Reverend Obadiah Monson, who was curate at the wedding, and who wrote the entry himself, and who remembers, Your Grace, remembers the colonel saying at the church door that his wife's land would go to his wife's child. Piers read the settlement twice. When he came to the words, "Unto the heirs of her body, lawfully begotten," he set his finger on them and left it there. "It is not even doubtful," he said. "It has never been doubtful. It has been unlooked at." Ferrars finally took off his hat. "There is worse. Say it. The rents." The lawyer opened his case and drew out a small book with a marbled cover, and he did not put it down. "Lady Danvers's steward keeps 2 sets of accounts. I did not steal this. A clerk in Reading who has not been paid since Lady Day was pleased to make me a copy for 2 guineas and a character." He turned it flat. "The Marbury rents run to 1100 a year. 620 are entered in the estate book. The remainder has gone, since 1816, to Sir Mallory Vane. To Vane. Every quarter, against a bond that was never registered, for a debt the estate does not owe, on the security of land she does not own." Ferrars's mouth made a shape that on another man would have been a smile. "Sir Mallory Vane is not Miss Sybil's godfather, Your Grace. He is her creditor, and I begin to think he is a good deal more nearly related to her than that. But I will not write down what I cannot prove." The candle guttered. Piers did not relight it. "How long to bring this to a court?" he said at last. "Chancery? 9 years. The estate would be eaten." Ferrars shook his head once. "But you do not want chancery. You hold the notes. Call in the debt and you may sit as good as a magistrate in that house, with Monson and the register and the will on the table, and the county in the room, and it is done in an afternoon." He looked up. "It wants only a day when everyone is present, and a reason they cannot leave." "The night of the ball," said Piers. "The night of the ball, and in the meantime—" In the meantime, nobody does anything at all. Nobody does anything at all, Ferrers agreed, which is the part that will cost you sleep. On the 14th of the month, at 4 in the afternoon, a hired chaise turned in at the gate of Marbury Grange, where the notice of execution had been taken down, and a rectangle of pale, unweathered oak showed where it had hung. 2 footmen in the brown serge livery of a house too proud to admit it got down from the back. The taller one carried in the plate chest without being asked twice. He wore a short powdered wig and white gloves and no rings whatever, and when Mrs. Honora Legg the housekeeper looked him over at the service door and said, "You are very tall for a hired man," he lowered his eyes and said, "So I am told, ma'am," and she said, "Keep them down, and you will do." In the passage he passed a small round woman in a brown gown and a cheap lace cap carrying a coal scuttle in each hand, who did not so much as glance at him. And in the long window of the sewing room upstairs, Juliana Danvers held a hem of red silk up to the last of the light and turned it, and could not for the life of her work out why Lady Lavinia, who had not paid a dressmaker since March, had that morning ordered a ball gown for Sybil in Coquelicot, and then, in the doorway, gone perfectly still, and said in an entirely new voice, "No, not the red. The red will be worn by nobody in this house." Downstairs the front bell rang, and Sir Mallory Vane's boots came into the hall, demanding to know where his money was. Juliana came down the back stair with the red silk still over her arm and stopped on the 3rd step from the bottom, because Sir Mallory Vane was standing in the middle of the hall with his hat on. £412, he said to Lavinia, advanced against the marriage. I want it, or I want the girl signed. Lavinia's gloved hand went to the drawing-room door and held it. You are shouting in my house. Your house is a rumor. His stick came down on the boards. Ferrers has been in Reading 3 days buying paper. My paper, your paper. Somebody is collecting this family like snuff boxes, and I should like to know whose pocket I am going into. Behind him, at the foot of the hall, the tall footman set down a plate chest without a sound and did not straighten up all the way. Sybil appeared at the top of the stairs in white muslin, saw her mother's face, and came down slowly, her hand riding the rail. "Mamma," she said, "why is he here on a Tuesday?" Nobody answered her. Lavinia's eyes had found Juliana on the stair, and the red silk on her arm, and stayed there, and something in her narrow face settled the way water settles when it has decided to freeze. "Juliana," she said pleasantly, "come down. Sir Mallory has a question about money and you keep the books. I keep the household book. You keep everything." Lavinia opened the drawing-room door wide. "Bring it." It took Juliana 4 minutes to fetch the ledger from the sewing room, and in those 4 minutes, Lavinia crossed to the escritoire, unlocked the small drawer with the key at her waist, took out a folded sheet in a hand not her own, and slid it between 2 pages of the book that lay waiting on the card table. Mrs. Prue, coming in with the coal, saw her do it. The little woman in the brown gown said nothing at all. She knelt at the grate, built the fire up with the patience of 61 years, and when she rose, she took the long way round the room, past the card table, and looked down once at the corner of paper standing proud of the ledger's edge. Then she carried the empty scuttle out and set it in the passage, and stood a moment with her hand flat against the wall. "Wilkes," she said to the tall footman, "Ma'am, there will be company in the drawing-room within the hour. Half the parish, if I know her. Stand where you can hear." I had intended to. Ursula Onslow looked up at her son a long way, and her jaw worked once. She has put a paper in the book. The scar on the back of his right hand whitened where his fingers closed. The company came, because Lavinia had been sending notes since noon, Mrs. Fenshaw of the Dower House, the Reverend Obadiah Monson, who had walked, 2 Miss Carbonells, Lady Trant, who had a carriage and used it for distances of half a mile, and who had never in her life arrived anywhere without hoping to be the second person to hear something. They took tea in a room where 3 of the chairs did not match, and Lavinia poured with a steady wrist, and Juliana stood by the window with the household book against her chest because she had not been invited to sit. "You will forgive me," Lavinia said, when the cups were down. "What I must say is a family matter, and I would rather say it before friends than have it whispered by servants." Monson set his tea aside. "Lady Lavinia, 9 years. Lavinia's voice was warm. That was the terrible part. It was warm. 9 years my late husband's daughter has kept the accounts of this house, and for 7 of them, the rents of the Lyford strips have come in short. £12, £19, 31, at Michaelmas last. The room did the thing rooms do. It got quiet in the wrong way. Juliana set the ledger down on the card table and opened it, and her hands were steady, because her hands had been threading needles by candlelight since she was 11 and did not know how to shake. The Lyford strips were let short, she said, because Bexon's roof fell in and I abated his rent for 2 quarters. It is entered, page 41. Read page 42, said Lavinia. The folded sheet was there. Juliana opened it. It was a receipt for £18, drawn on the Reading Bank, made out in a clerkly hand, and signed at the foot. Signed with her own name, in her own loops, the D of Danvers carried up and over the way she had carried it since she was a girl. She looked at it for the length of 3 breaths. In the doorway, the tall footman shifted his weight and Mrs. Legg's hand came up and closed on his sleeve without her looking at him. "This is not my signature," Juliana said. "It is remarkably like it." "Yes." She laid it flat on the table, face up, where everyone could see. "It is remarkably like it. Reverend Monson, you have my hand on the parish subscription list going back 6 years. Would you fetch it?" Monson half rose. "Sit down, Obadiah," said Lady Trant, delighted. "Let her explain the £18 first." "There were no £18, Juliana said. "There was no bank. I have not been to Reading since the spring of 16, and I went in the carrier's cart, and the carrier is Ned Sparrow, and he is alive and in the village and can be asked." Lavinia smiled at her tea. "You see how quickly she has the answers. I have the answers because I have done the work. Then account for the roof." "I have accounted for the roof." "Account," said Lavinia, "for the fact that this family cannot pay its butcher, and its plate is pawned, and its daughter is to be married out of gratitude rather than portion, while its housekeeper's stepdaughter buys ribbon. I have not bought ribbon since." "Since when?" Juliana stopped. She did not finish it. There was a stillness in her that a sharper room would have read, and the room was not sharp, it was thirsty. What she did not say was that the last ribbon she had bought had been for her mother's coffin. Sybil had been silent through all of it, standing by the pianoforte with her fan shut in her hand. Now she came forward, and she came the way a girl comes who has been told a thing at breakfast and has been waiting all afternoon for the cue. "Mamma says you took it for the doctor," she said, "for your mother, at the end. Sybil, that is what she says." Sybil's eyes were very round and very blue and entirely dry. "She says nobody would blame you. She says it is the sort of thing a woman does when she is desperate and has no name of her own." Juliana looked at the girl she had taught to hold a pen. "Your father," she said quietly, "paid that doctor, in front of me, in this room." "My father is dead and cannot be asked," said Sybil, and it was the first genuinely clever thing she had ever said, and she flushed with the pleasure of it, and then she did the rest. She reached out and took hold of the cameo at Juliana's throat. It was shell, and the ribbon behind it was old, and it came away in one pull with a small dry sound that everybody in the room heard and nobody afterwards could quite describe. "And this," Sybil said, holding it up, "came out of the Marbury inventory. Mamma had it valued. It is entailed with the house, and the house is Mamma's." Juliana's hand went to her collarbone and found nothing there. For the first time in 9 years, the thing she had touched 40 times a day was not under her fingers. Lady Trant laughed. That was what did it, not the paper, not the girl. It was Lady Trant, who had known Juliana's mother, who had eaten at her mother's table, putting a hand up to her mouth and laughing behind it. The Miss Carbonells laughed because Lady Trant did. Mrs. Fenshaw looked into her cup and let it happen, which is a form of laughing that leaves no evidence. In the doorway, a tall footman took one step into the room. A small hand in a coarse linen apron caught his wrist and held it, and Ursula Onslow, 61 years old, 3 inches over 5 feet, did not let go. "Not yet," she breathed. "She is standing in a room being taken apart." Yes, his mother's grip did not slacken. And every soul who laughs is signing something. Let them sign, Piers. The scar on his hand was white to the knuckle. He stayed. Juliana did not weep and she did not sit down. She closed the household book. She squared it. She picked up the forged receipt between two fingers, folded it once along the crease Lavinia had already made, and held it out to the Reverend Monson. "Keep that," she said. "Do not give it back to her. Whatever is decided tonight, that paper exists tomorrow, and I should like it to exist in your pocket and not in that drawer." Monson took it. His hand shook. Hers did not. "Juliana. Page 41, Reverend. Bexon's Roof. Read it at your leisure, and read it aloud in the vestry if you like." She turned to Lavinia. "You will want me out of the house. I want an accounting." "You want me out of the house," Juliana said, "before Mr. Ferrars comes back from Reading." The name landed. Lavinia's cup went down a half-inch too hard in its saucer, and Sir Mallory Vane, by the fire, lifted his chin like a dog that has heard a gate. "Who," said Lady Trant happily, "is Mr. Ferrars?" "A solicitor," said Juliana, "who has spent 3 days in Reading buying every bill this family has signed. Ask Sir Mallory. He was shouting about it in the hall an hour ago." Sir Mallory went the color of his own waistcoat. "You will not," Lavinia said, very softly, "make my drawing-room into a courtroom. I have not made it anything. You did that when you invited Lady Trant." It was, the tall footman thought, a precise and elegant piece of work, and he had spent 20 years among men who were paid to be precise. They put her out of the sewing-room that night. Not out of the house. Lavinia was not a fool, and a stepdaughter sleeping in a ditch is a story that travels. But out of the room with the long window, and into the small chamber over the scullery where the plaster came away if you leaned on it. Mrs. Legg carried up the candle herself and set it on the sill and stood there with her keys in her fist. "There is no lock on that door," she said. "I know. I shall be at the foot of the back stair till 2, and cook after." Juliana looked at her. "Honora." "Do not," said Mrs. Legg, "make me a friend at this hour of my life. I have 41 years in this house, and I know what a forged hand looks like, because I have seen her ladyship practice it on the back of a laundry list." She went to the door. Twice. The candle burned down 2 inches. At 11:30, Juliana got up, took the stub, and went along the passage, not down, along, to the little muniment closet under the west gable, where nobody had been since the funeral, and where the boxes of her father's papers had been shoved to make room for Sybil's trunks. She was on her knees in the dust with her sleeves pushed back when the door moved behind her. The tall footman stood in it with a lantern held low. "You should not be on this floor," she said, without turning round. "No, nor should I, apparently." She lifted a bundle tied in tape and blew on it, and the dust went up in the lantern light. "The marriage settlement of 1798, my mother's. If it exists, it is in one of these." He came in and set the lantern on a trunk and knelt down opposite her, and his knees cracked and neither of them remarked on it. "What is in it?" "The Lyford strips." She untied the tape with her teeth on one hand and her nails on the other. 61 acres. Settled on my mother at her marriage and on her issue after her. Not on the estate, not on my father to give away, and not on his widow to sell. She looked up. "Sybil's portion is those acres. Every pound of it. Lavinia has been offering a duke land that is not hers to offer. You are certain." "I am certain of the acres. I am not certain of the paper." She held up the bundle. "Which is why I am in a cupboard at midnight instead of in bed, being ruined quietly." He did not smile. He wanted to, badly. "And if the paper is not here?" "Then it is at Doctors' Commons, or it is at the Reading office, or it was burned in 12 when the office burned, and in that case, I have no acres, no name, no cameo, and no character." She went back to the tape. "And I shall still have gone through the boxes. Hold the light closer, Wilkes." He held the light closer. They went through 4 boxes. Church rates, a bill for a mare, letters from a sister in Bath, dead these 20 years. In the 5th, under a folded map of a field system that no longer existed, a heavy paper with 3 seals on it, and the word Danvers, and the word Lyford, and a date. Juliana's breath went out of her. She did not shout. She turned the sheet to the lantern, read down it once, and then her thumb stopped near the foot, on a name that had no business there at all. "Whose," she said, "is this hand?" The footman looked. The witness signature was small and clerkly and 30 years old, and it read, quite clearly, "Augustus Ferrars, clerk of Reading." Ferrers witnessed my mother's settlement, Juliana said slowly. Ferrers is Rochford's man. Ferrers has spent 3 days buying my stepmother's debts. She sat back on her heels in the dust. He has known since the day he arrived exactly whose land he was pricing. Yes, said the footman. Something in the flatness of it made her turn her head. The lantern was between them, and it lit him from below, and his eyes were gray and set deep, and they were not looking at her the way a hired man's eyes look at anything. You said that, she said, as though you had not just learned it. Downstairs, a door banged. Feet on the back stair, several, and Lavinia's voice above them, high and carrying, calling for Mrs. Legg and for lights and for the west gable, because Sybil, who could not sleep, had gone along the passage for water and seen a lantern where no lantern should be. Juliana was already on her feet with the settlement in her hand. Go down the servants' way, she said. You were never here. Juliana, they will turn you off without a character and it will be my doing, and I have enough of that tonight. She pushed the bundle of tape into his hands and kept the sealed sheet. Take the empty boxes. Look stupid. You are very good at it. The footsteps reached the head of the stair. She stepped out into the passage with the candle stub in one hand and her father's seals in the other, and met Lavinia Danvers coming the other way with a lamp, and behind her Sybil in a shawl, and behind Sybil 2 men from the village whom Sir Mallory had roused out of the tap-room. Lavinia looked at the sheet in Juliana's hand. She looked at it for 1 second longer than a woman looks at something she has never seen before. Take it, she said. The larger of the 2 men from the village had Juliana's wrist before she had finished stepping back, and the seals cracked against the doorframe, and Sybil said, "Oh," quite softly, quite genuinely, and then said nothing else. Put her in the still room, Lavinia said, and send for the constable in the morning. £18 is felony. And down at the end of the dark passage, unseen, a tall footman in brown serge stood absolutely still with a bundle of tape in his hands, and let it happen for 11 more hours. The still room door was not locked at dawn. Juliana pushed it with her shoulder, and it swung, and the tall footman in brown serge was gone from the passage, and a folded square of paper lay on the flagstone where he had stood. She did not read it there. She carried it up the back stair, past the housemaids hauling coal, and opened it at the window of the linen closet, where the light was gray and honest. 11 words. Wear the red one, downstairs, 10 o'clock. Trust the maid. She burned it in the candle stub and washed her hands. Below her, Rochford Hall had been awake since 4. The great ballroom smelled of beeswax and forced lilies. 200 candles waited in their sockets. Lavinia Danvers had been up since 6 as well, directing the hanging of her own daughter's portrait in a house that did not belong to her, and telling the housekeeper Honora Legge where the Danvers arms ought to sit on the supper table. Mrs. Legge wrote nothing down. She had her orders from a different quarter. By 9 o'clock the carriages had begun. By 1:30, the ton had filled the long gallery 3 deep, and Sir Mallory Vane had already spilled claret on his striped waistcoat and told 4 separate gentlemen that his goddaughter would be a duchess before Michaelmas. Augustus Ferrers stood beside the orchestra dais with the red leather case flat against his ribs, and did not drink and did not sit. At 9:45, a small, robust woman in brown serge and clogs came through the ballroom carrying a tray of ratafia. Her cap was cheap lace. Her cheeks were red as winter apples. She had been called Mrs. Prue for 19 days and answered to it beautifully. Sybil Danvers saw her and remembered her and did not like being remembered. You, Sybil said, you served in the kitchen passage, the one who sat down with the thief. The old woman curtsied. The tray did not tremble. I sat with a lady, miss. The word lady traveled about 8 feet and found Lavinia's ear. Lavinia turned in her bottle green silk, ostrich plume swaying, and the granate necklace at her throat caught the candlelight, and something in her narrow face closed like a shutter. Sybil, she said, not here. But Sybil had a glass in her hand, and 100 faces watching her, and she was 21, and she had been told all her life that the room belonged to her. She took a step. She turned her wrist. The wine came down across the brown serge in a long red stripe, over the linen apron, into the clogs. The old woman stood perfectly still and let it run. Now, Sybil said, you will kneel and mop it, and then you will go to the yard and be whipped for insolence. And if my mother is merciful, you will keep your place. Nobody in that ballroom moved. A fan snapped shut somewhere near the pillars. The orchestra, uncertain, stopped in the middle of a bar, and the silence that came after was the loudest thing in Berkshire. Then a woman in a faded biscuit muslin came down the last 3 steps of the service stair. Except it was not the biscuit muslin. It was coquelicot silk, poppy red, with a crepe overskirt that moved like water and long kid gloves to the elbow, and her copper hair was dressed low with 2 loose strands, as it had always been, and her hands inside those gloves were still the hands of a woman who had mended a hem in 3 places by candlelight for 14 years. Lavinia's mouth opened. Nothing came out of it. Juliana crossed the floor. She did not look at her stepmother. She did not look at the tun. She went to the puddle of claret and the broken glass, and she gathered her skirts, and she knelt. The whole room saw a woman in a 500-guinea gown put her knee down in the wine. She picked the shards out of the wet, one by one, into the palm of her glove. Her voice, when it came, was not loud. It did not need to be. "Sybil, come here." "I will not." "Then hear it from where you stand." Juliana lifted the last piece of glass. "You have been taught that a house is judged by the people it can humiliate. That is a lie told by people who have never been the ones on the floor." She rose. "I have been on this floor. I know every board of it. It is the only part of that house I ever truly owned." She turned to the old woman and, before 200 witnesses, took the wine-soaked apron between her fingers and wiped the woman's wrist clean of claret. "You are not whipped in any house of mine," she said. "Not while I stand in it." Sybil laughed. It came out thin and wrong. "House of yours." A hand closed over Juliana's. It was the footman's hand. Brown serge sleeve, white glove, and a fine scar across the back of the right one, and the grip of a man who had been holding himself still for 11 hours and was finished with it. He raised her to her feet as though she weighed nothing. Then he did not let go. He looked past her, at the doorway of the long gallery, and lifted 2 fingers. The doors at the north end opened. They opened at the south end. Men came in at both. Not soldiers, not violence, but constables of the county, and 2 clerks, and a magistrate's officer with a staff, and they took the 4 corners of the ballroom and stood there, and closed nothing, and threatened nobody, and every guest understood at once that no one was leaving. The footman stripped the powdered wig off his head and dropped it on the tray. Black hair, gray at the temples, gray eyes set deep. He pulled the white gloves from his hands, and there, on the 3rd finger, was the gold signet of Rochefort, which he had worn under the serge for 19 days. Augustus Ferrers stepped up on the orchestra dais, opened the red case, and read from a card in a dry voice that carried to the last pillar. His Grace Piers Onslow, Duke of Rochefort. Sybil's fan fell out of her fingers and did not break. "And," Ferrers said, "Her Grace the Dowager Duchess of Rochefort." The old woman in the wine-stained serge untied her apron. She handed it to the nearest astonished footman, as though he had been born to receive it. She took off the cheap lace cap. And Honora Legg came forward at a pace that had clearly been rehearsed, with dark violet velvet over her arm, and a turban of plumes, and a parure of garnets in a case, and the tun watched the Dowager Duchess of Rochefort dress herself back into her rank in the middle of her own ballroom, unhurried, while nobody breathed. Ursula Onslow settled the garnets at her throat. She looked at Sybil Vane Danvers for a long moment. "I came to your country in serge," she said, "because a mother should meet her son's intended bride before the contract, and not after." She turned to her son, Pierce. The Duke took the folded contract of betrothal out of Ferris's case. He held it up so the candlelight came through the paper and showed the seals. He tore it once, twice. He let the pieces go, and they fell on the wet floor, into the claret. Lavinia Danvers found her voice then, and it was the wrong voice, too loud and too fast. "Your Grace, a servant's clumsiness. My daughter has been provoked all evening by a woman who stole 18 pounds from my strong-box." "Mr. Ferrers," said the Duke. "The 18 pounds," said Ferrers, "were paid out on the 22nd of March against a tradesman's bill for Miss Sybil's silver gauze. On your own written order, madam, which I hold. I have held it since April." The plume above Lavinia's turban trembled and stopped. "You will all attend at Marbury Grange on Thursday at 11, the Duke said to the room, "where these matters will be heard in the open. before the magistrate, with the doors unbarred. I would take it as a courtesy if you came. They came. Every one of them came. 3 days later, the great hall of Marbury Grange held more people than it had held since the last century, and the plaster was still cracked, and the rain still came in at the north window, and nobody had swept the leaves out of the porch. The magistrate sat at the long table with the Reverend Obadiah Monson on his right, spectacles down his nose, and Augustus Ferrars on his left, with the red case open at last, and its contents in 7 stacks. Ferrars read the bills first. He read them the way a man reads a river out of a map. 1100 to a Bond Street modiste, 460 to a jeweler, 900 to a coachmaker, sums to a wine merchant, a milliner, a dancing master, a portrait painter. Then the mortgage on Marbury Grange itself, drawn in the 5th year of the late Mr. Danvers's widow's administration, renewed twice, and sold in February. Sold to whom? Said the magistrate. Who knew? To His Grace the Duke of Rochefort, said Ferrars. Every instrument, entire. There is not a shilling of Danvers' debt in England that is not held in this case. Lavinia stood up. Sir Mallory Vane put a hand on her arm, and she shook it off. Those were household debts. Household debts are the estates. They were, said Ferrars, charged against rents. The rents of Ashcombe, Little Ray, and the Marbury Water Meadows. Reverend Monson rose then, small and untidy, and set 2 things on the table: a parish register and a will. I married Thomas Danvers to Charlotte Ashcombe in this parish in '85, he said. I baptized their daughter Juliana in '86. I witnessed Charlotte Ashcombe's settlement, which entailed Ashcombe, Little Ray, and the Water Meadows upon her issue by her body, and upon no second wife and no second wife's child, in any event whatsoever. He turned a page with a thumb yellow from snuff. I also witnessed the last will of Thomas Danvers. It has lain in the parish chest at Marbury since the year 6, because the widow refused to receive it, and I would not burn it. He read 3 lines of it. That was all it took. Sybil Vane Danvers's dowry, the dowry that had bought the silver gauze and the pearl tiara and the 4 boxes from London, was made, entirely and in every acre, of land that had never for 1 hour belonged to her mother. The hall made a sound like wind in a barn. Monson set the register down and did not sit. There is one further entry, and I will read it, because I have carried it too long. In the year 6, the widow came to the vestry and offered me £40 to lose that will. I wrote the offer in the margin, and the date, and my own name beneath it. He held the page up. It is still there. Any gentleman may come and look. 4 of them did. Afterwards, 1 at a time, and each went away quieter than he came. Juliana had not spoken once through the whole hearing. She stood at the side of the table in grey wool with her hands folded, and when Ferrars laid the restored deeds before her, she read every line of the first one before she touched the pen. The tenants, she said. Little Ray has had no drainage since my mother died. That comes before anything. Ferrars made a note. It was the first order given at Marbury Grange in 14 years that anybody intended to obey. Sir Mallory Vane, said the magistrate, you swore to the value of that dowry before me in January. You will answer for it at the assizes, and you will find sureties today, or you will not sleep at home. Sir Mallory sat down very heavily, and his silver-headed cane rolled off his knee and rattled on the boards, and no one picked it up. The magistrate wrote for some while. Then he read the order. The mortgages foreclosed, the personal debts of Lavinia Danvers called in at the holder's pleasure, the settled lands restored to Juliana Danvers, sole issue of Charlotte Ashcombe, and Lavinia Danvers and Sybil Vane Danvers, to quit Marbury Grange and all its lands within 7 days, having no estate, right, title, or interest therein. Lavinia turned, not to the table, to the Duke, standing by the cold hearth in midnight blue with his arms folded. You could have taken it in February, she said. You had the paper in February. Why wait? Because in February, he said, I had bought debts. I had not yet met the woman they had been taken out of. Sybil was crying now, and it was the first honest thing she had done in the story. She reached into her reticule and put a small object down on the long table, hard, as though it burned her. A shell cameo on a worn ribbon. Nobody moved to take it. The Duke crossed the boards, picked it up, and turned it over in his scarred hand. This was torn off a woman's neck in front of 100 people, he said, for sport. He looked at the 2 of them a last time. Go and be poor honestly. It is not as bad as you have spent your lives believing. They went out through the porch with the leaves in it. The carriage they left in was not theirs either, and the coachman had his orders, and it took them as far as the turnpike and no further. That evening the candles were lit at Marbury Grange for the first time in 14 years. Not the tallow, the wax, out of the cellar, that Lavinia had been saving for a wedding. The neighborhood came. Honora Lega stood at the door with her keys and announced them, and the Dowager Duchess sat in the best chair in violet velvet with a plate of ratafia biscuits, and told anyone who would listen exactly how long she had scrubbed the Rocheford stillroom floor, and how badly her son's servants did it. Juliana came down the front stair. She had not used the front stair in her life. Coquelicot silk again, and the long kid gloves, and her hair low and simple. The Duke waited at the bottom with the cameo in his palm. He did not give it to her. He stepped behind her, lifted the ribbon over her head, and tied it himself at the nape of her neck, and his fingers were not steady, and the whole room saw that too. "Marbury is yours," he said. "The rents, the roof, the keys, the leases. I hold nothing. Mr. Ferrars has the deeds, and they are in your name and no other." "And you?" "I am asking," he said, "for one dance and a very great deal of your time." "You served me tea in a kitchen passage," she said, "and let me be locked in a still room for 11 hours. "I did." His jaw tightened. "I needed the county to see it done. I have never in my life been sorrier for anything, and I will be paying for it a long while." "Yes," she said, "you will." Then she put her hand in his. The orchestra found the waltz. He turned her out onto the floor of the hall where she had knelt every winter to scrub the flags, and the poppy silk swept the boards, and the Dowager Duchess wept into a garnet-heavy handkerchief and denied it afterwards, and Reverend Monson took a second glass, which he never did. Halfway through, she leaned close to his ear. "How long did you know?" "The night you walked 5 miles in the rain," he said, and came in at the service door and thanked a maid for her tea. There was a gray muslin gown upstairs in a press, mended in 3 places, and she never wore it again, and she never gave it away either. 14 years she had been in a room and no one had looked at her. It took a man in a footman's coat to see her, and one kneeling to see them all. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever been the one kneeling to gather the broken glass while the room laughed? Has someone in your own family ever taken from you the one small thing that was truly yours, the way Sybil tore that cameo from Juliana's neck? And when you meet a stranger in plain clothes, do you treat them the way Juliana treated Mrs. Prue over a cup of tea? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, kindness shown to the unseen, and justice that arrives at last, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.